Good morning, folks. Thank you very much for tuning in to the news at Ben. Now, I normally start by saying, I hope you've had a good week. But as 2024 draws to a close, it would be more appropriate to say, I hope you've had a good year. Of course, it's been an extremely challenging year, as it has been for many years now. I think ever since we voted to leave the EU, we've had really quite a tumultuous time of it. And in a sense, the reason I'm in politics is because of the challenges we face. And I do believe they are extremely serious challenges. As you would have heard me say in the past, I think the United Kingdom and indeed Western civilization is facing an existential threat. In the case of the UK, we are challenged constitutionally, democratically, culturally, and economically. And these are challenges, as I say, most of Western civilization is facing. And most of the problems we face are homegrown. They are problems that our governing classes have created for us. And what we've come to do is, again, you would have heard me say many times, I'm sure, is govern the country. Western civilization is governing itself through global principles, seeking global betterment, and hoping that that somehow will be better for its own countries, for our countries. But we've done so much globalization that actually it's now proving an existential threat to the various nation states in Western civilization. And I'm not being scaremongering when I say that. I think we all know it in our hearts that we are facing some kind of dramatic change in Western civilization. We see it economically, with debt levels at massive highs, taxation at massive highs, and really nothing to show for all this borrowing and debt. There are potholes everywhere, our energy is expensive, the public transport doesn't work properly, rubbish collection isn't what it used to be, our local authorities are basically bust, and so on and so forth. We have 7.2 million people on universal credit. That figure was 6 million last year, 3 million before lockdowns, and 1 million in 2018. Just think of it, 7.2 million people surviving to a greater or lesser extent on benefits. This is a sign of a broken economy. And we have broken culture in the United Kingdom, rampant immigration with no eye on integration, indeed a regulatory and legal framework which progressively discriminates in favour of those who've come to the United Kingdom against those who were already here, has basically created multicultural silos in the UK, many of which are existing in antipathy to each other and in antipathy to the UK itself. And that is all very, very unhealthy, of course. And then we have the constitutional damage that's been done to the UK through globalization. So, for example, the European Convention of Human Rights, which prohibits us from being able to do that which we need to do to protect our British interests, the signing of the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson did with the EU, putting a border down the very middle of the United Kingdom between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. All of this has come about because our governing class hasn't put national interest first. And what gives me great hope is that across the Atlantic, we are now going to have a president who is going to put America first, who's going to yank back at this liberal global order and put America's interest and American citizens' interest first and foremost. He's going to enforce America's borders, he's going to deregulate, he's going to get rid of net zero, and he's going to cut taxes on everything other than imports. And that too, I think, is the right thing to be doing, imposing some form of tariffs on imports going into the US. Because with this run at globalization that we've also had rampant global trade. And whilst that's kept inflation down, it's kept consumers being able to buy really cheap stuff, it's also done great damage to our domestic producers, particularly in areas of national importance, such as, for example, our steel industry and our farming industry that has been in the news so frequently and rightly in the news over the last couple of months, with the further damage done to it with Rachel Reeves' budget. And the flip side of this globalized trade that we've had, this kind of rampant globalized trade that we've been practicing, is the enrichment of countries like China. And through that enrichment, they have become military powerhouses. China is building islands in the South China Sea on which it will be able to base its military bases. It will be able to place its military bases, jet fighters, more ships off them, etc. We've created geopolitical risks through globalized trade. We did it with Russia as well. Germany became far too dependent on Russian fossil fuel, and in having to wean itself off, it's had off that fuel. Given the war in Ukraine, it's had a cardiac arrest, and at the same time as creating this geopolitical instability in significant part through a rampant global trade, we've hollowed out our defences. Our armed forces in the UK are a shadow of their former selves. And even though more European countries now do meet the 2% of GDP target that NATO sets them, actually they're not buying anywhere near as much military hardware as is required in order to protect Europe and Western civilization generally. And again, Trump may be being a little excessive when he says we need to spend 5% of our GDP on defense, but he's got a point. If we're going to, particularly if the UK is going to allow Zelensky to fire Storm Shadow missiles into Russia, we need a strong military. And so we must increase our defense spend. All of this agenda is going to be promoted by Trump. And the really good thing, by the way, and I see this as a really positive thing, of Trump doing what he's going to do in America, is that unless we follow suit, the damage we've already done to the UK will be much, much worse as a result. Because if he cuts taxes, deregulates, imposes tariffs, puts up borders, puts America first, and we don't, people are going to leave the UK and go and settle in the US. People are going to disinvest in the UK, sell their UK assets, and buy American assets, because he would have supercharged the American economy, and we will still be hooked on the ridiculously high cost economy that we've created for ourselves through the various regulatory impediments we've put in our way and the high taxes to which our governments have become so hooked on. And similarly, if we don't cut our immigration dramatically, empower the British worker, we will find that our economy goes further and further down the drain. We've got to get those 7.2 million people who are on universal credit fully back into the workplace. And I'm afraid with that will come some tough medicine. We will have to cut benefits, absolutely. If you've been out of work for a year or 2 years, there's got to be an expectation, unless you've got really serious circumstances, that you will get back into work. And in order to make work attractive, and I've touched on it already, we need to cut taxes. And all of this is going to be revealed by Trump. Of course, Reform UK has had an agenda of that sort for a while, but it was an outlier having that agenda. It is now going to be mainstream, that cutting taxes, ditching net zero and all of that, it's going to become mainstream. And I can see the Conservative Party under Kemi Badenoch is embracing it as well. Kemi talks about principles, not policies, but she's coming round to it. She is taking the Conservative Party, which, by the way, is not an easy beast to manage. She's taking it slowly and surely to the position it should be in to be worthy of the name Conservative. And I see the competition that's likely to develop between Reform UK and the Conservative Party also is a very positive thing, because they'll be competing for the same policies, the same space. It'll keep both parties relatively honest in their agendas. And the Labour Party, you never know, might wake up to it and actually see, well, they've got to get on board, because if they don't, they're going to get wiped out. The UK is going to be in trouble and they will be wiped out at the next election. So as we move into 2025, even though I think we've had a really torrid few years, I hope that what's happening across the Atlantic and what's happening to some extent domestically already in our own politics, a new path can be set for the UK, a path that puts the UK's national interest and the interests of its people at the heart of all principles and all policy making, and that we can move forward with aspiration, hope and ambition once again for our country. And with that positive message, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and a prosperous 2025. Thank you very much.